Russia, like it or not, it's at war. And it doesn't make any difference what they do. Remember, we've created this false dichotomy. We in NATO and the United States, we're good because we're a liberal democracy. Well, that's a joke. Our democracy is a fraud. That's one of the things I talked about in the Versailles on the Potomac. The ballot box is broken. You can't vote your way out of anything anymore. No matter who you vote for, you get the same disastrous outcome. So obviously democracy has failed miserably. And then if you're an authoritarian, you're bad because all the liberal Democrats are good. Well, that's absurd. Because if you look at the authoritarianism, at least in Russia, and I would argue in several other places, these societies are very solid. Russian society is cohesive. Russia is a success.
That's not a line you often hear in Western media, and that's precisely the point. Macgregor's not defending authoritarianism. He's pointing out something deeper. When institutions in the West fail to deliver results for their people, the moral high ground starts to crumble. We call others authoritarian, but what happens when our own democracy no longer reflects the will of the people? That's a hard question we need to face.
Putin isn't in danger of being overthrown. He's not this weak dictator that lives in a state of permanent paranoia. This is all nonsense. So what it boils down to, if you're a Russian, is as follows. And Americans don't understand this. You can't get to a negotiated settlement with the United States, Ukraine, its puppet, and NATO, unless you understand three things. Number one, what exists in Kiev is a cancer. It's a tumor on the body of Russia. This cancerous tumor must be removed. And that's what President Putin and his armed forces have been doing for the last 3.5, 4 years. They're removing the tumor.
It's a brutal metaphor, but one that tells you how Russia views this conflict, not as a political dispute, not as diplomacy gone wrong, but as survival. And when a nation sees something as existential, they won't stop halfway.
However, just cutting the tumor itself away is not enough. You've got to go to the margins when you perform surgery. You have to look at the area around it, the organs that are adjacent to the location of the tumor. They have to be dealt with. You have to systematically examine them, and if there's evidence for cancer, they too must be subjected to surgery and removal. Well, my point is, you can't get that in a settlement with the United States that ends up with a U.S./British puppet in charge in Kiev. Even if it's a rump Ukrainian state, can't be done. Secondly, you can't have a state where the CIA, MI6, and Mossad are effectively controlling everything, which is the case today in Ukraine. That means that President Trump faces the unenviable task of crossing the Dnieper River, of going into Kiev, eventually down into Odessa. And I think that's what they're preparing to do. But before they go, they are going to systematically annihilate whatever remains of Ukrainian military power east of the Dnieper River. And that's what's going on. These cauldrons contain the last remnants.
This isn't a war of shock and awe. It's slow, methodical elimination designed to make sure nothing is left to rebuild from. It's hard to grasp that kind of strategy in a world obsessed with quick victories. But Russia is playing the long game.
In other words, instead of a lightning offensive, this operation is more like a vacuum cleaner. In other words, you're using the vacuum cleaner at various points to clean up and eliminate the opposition. And remember, the purpose of this special military operation was also always root out and destroy the Ukrainian military that is there because of its association with the regime. That's almost over. That's going to happen very, very soon. And then they have to do what I said, because if you don't do it, whatever agreement you come to, you will see a resumption of cancer. While the tumor may go, within months, within years, the cancer will return because you haven't done a thorough surgery.
That's the risk in every conflict, isn't it? Leaving the roots intact. We've seen this before. Quick solutions that lead to long-term chaos. What he's saying is half measures don't lead to peace, they lead to relapse.
The only way to do that is to cross that river. Now, we in the United States don't understand that. Most Americans don't understand how much power and influence over all of this the CIA has, or MI6, or the Mossad. If you go into the Middle East, you see the same thing happening today in Syria with this corridor that reaches from Israel along Syria, where the Druze live, up to where the Kurds live, and then ultimately to Azerbaijan. This long corridor is designed to sustain the flow in oil, of gas, and potentially other things, commodities into Israel, but it's also there to split Iran from Russia and to strangle Iran to the extent that they can, better yet, to balkanize it by breaking it up, hence the interest in Azerbaijan's potential invasion of northwestern Iran. So we have the same playbook, if you will, that we saw fail miserably against Russia in Ukraine being implemented now. Now, there are a lot of variables in this one, far more complex than what they tried to do in Ukraine.
The Middle East is layered in ways Ukraine never was. Ethnic groups, proxies, pipelines, religious fault lines. It's a chessboard with a dozen players and no fixed rules. Applying the same playbook here could unravel far more than people expect.
Because you're dealing with the ISIS remnants that now constitute a new Syrian jihadist regime. You still have the Alawites up in the corner who are being helped and assisted by the Russians to survive. And then you have the Israelis that are continuing to encroach. They want to control the watershed that comes out of the Mount Hebron. They want to control southern Lebanon. And then over the horizon sits this thing called Turkey, which is a serious economic trouble. We all know that. And is led by probably someone who is even more adroit in marketing himself than Trump. And he's on every side of every problem. He's sustaining Israel with oil and gas and food, and at the same time, he's condemning Israel and pretending to be a leader of Islam. But he's in such bad economic shape, he's afraid if he does anything, he'll fall apart.
It's easy to forget just how fragile some of these governments really are. When economic pressure reaches a breaking point, even the strongest rhetoric can't hold things together. That's when unpredictable choices start to surface.
Same thing is true for Sisi over in Egypt. The question is, when do these economic matters not matter? When does this become an emotional moment where people say, to hell with this, we have to fight? I don't know, but I think it's coming. And then in the background, you also have Iran, who's part of the Belt and Road, the One Belt, One Road initiative. And that's not going away. That's wildly successful. Contrary to what President Trump says, BRICS is wildly successful. More and more people want to join it because they want to get out from under the debt bomb. The debt bomb is what they've lived under from us. That's what the IMF, the World Bank, the SWIFT system, everything's designed to pass our debt to them and indebt them. We talk about a debt trap. We're in the business of creating debt traps everywhere we go. The dollar has almost become a virus. That's why de-dollarization is well underway.
That's one of the most underreported shifts globally. The dollar isn't collapsing, but it is being challenged. Quietly, strategically. And it's not just about currency, it's about sovereignty, leverage, and the long shadow of debt.
Well, you noticed, you're aware, of course, of the recent developments with Belarus and Lukashenko, that you can now be in White Russia or Belarus and run for office in Russia. In other words, Belarus and Russia are being ever more tightly integrated. And of course, in return for that, Lukashenko has received a lot of financial aid from Russia. He also has now nuclear weapons inside Belarus that are Russian and manned by Russians, but nevertheless, they're there to reassure him that his country is protected. I think that as a result of this, you're going to see an offensive launched from Belarus south down to Kiev. And I think that'll be part of the larger offensive that causes Kiev to be taken. And if I were living in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and Poland, I would be very concerned about these dangerous remarks that Donahue has made about Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad might feel like a distant Cold War relic, but in today's climate, it's a tripwire. One careless word from a Western official could ignite something much bigger. We've forgotten how quickly history can repeat itself.
Now, I'm the last person in the world to say I'm happy the Russians are in Kaliningrad. I'm not. That was another gift from FDR to Stalin. Stalin just asked offhandedly, well, we're on the border of East Prussia. If we take it, can we keep it? And FDR said, oh, sure, why not? So it's become very important to the Russians, but it was not necessarily in the interest of the West at that point for the Soviets to conquer it. And incidentally, it was on the table for sale by Gorbachev to Chancellor Kohl. And Chancellor Kohl argued that they'd spend so many billions of marks to buy back East Germany from the Soviets at the time that they couldn't afford to buy East Prussia. Well, he also had some personal axes to grind. He didn't care about East Prussia because he was from the Rhineland. That's another story, sadly. But there were opportunities to do things differently. But the point is now it's a done deal. It's a fact. It's not something that you go to war over. Everybody accepts that. But apparently everybody doesn't all of a sudden. And you see, this gets back to the position the Russians are in. Today you say one thing, tomorrow you say another. What do we believe? When do we know what you are saying is real? So I think at this point, Moscow doesn't believe much of anything that any of us say. What they've decided to do is be prepared for the worst. And, Glenn, we are not prepared for the worst in the West.
That's a haunting statement, because it's true. While others prepare for war, disruption, and economic chaos, many in the West are still acting like the world will simply go back to the way it was. That's not how history works.
MI6 would like Zelensky to step in and replace Zelensky. I'm sure we would be receptive to that. But that's another puppet. That's not someone who is an independent. That is not someone who is going to govern exclusively in the national interests of the people that live in whatever the rump state of Ukraine becomes in the future. I don't see any evidence that an attempt to replace Zelensky with Zelensky will somehow or another be seen in Russia as meaningful. Again, it's what we said earlier. The cancer is there. The cancer has to be systematically purged and removed from the body politic in Ukraine. So replacing Zelensky with someone like Zelensky means nothing. But yes, I think people in Washington decided it's probably advantageous to have someone other than Zelensky there. Who knows? Again, we are not going to give up this game of interference, disruption, subversion that we play with our intelligence services. We're operating all over the world. We've got these entities. These fronts called National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID. Everyone cheered when President Trump set out to shut those down. They're terrible. They're occupied and staffed with people that want perpetual revolution. They're Trotskyite revolutionaries. They have nothing to do with liberal democracy. That's ridiculous. And the CIA certainly doesn't give a damn about that. These entities are about permanent conflict that is designed to enhance and strengthen the West. The problem is, Glenn, it doesn't work, and it hasn't done that. Things are not improving around the world for us.
This is the part where realism meets humility. For all our talk of promoting stability, the outcomes tell a different story. If we don't question the strategy or the people funding it, how can anything actually improve?
But President Trump, I don't think, has any influence over this. I think there are other powerful figures. It's back to the 1%. The billionaires on Wall Street and in the City of London banks, that's one group. You have another group of what I call neocon billionaires that are firm believers that they hate Russia. They are rabid Israeli advocates. They want war. And then there's the third group that's always been with us, certainly since the early 60s. These are just warmed over Bolsheviks. But you've got people like Soros who are multi-billionaires, and that's what they are, and that's what they promote. Balkanization, Bolshevism, Bolshevization, chaos. And they think that that's the road to success. Perhaps we should call them anarchists. I don't know what you call them, but at the end of the day, these people are catastrophic, and they're running the show in Washington because they paid everyone off.
That line might sound cynical, but it's hard to argue with. If influence is bought, not earned, then what happens to trust? To legitimacy, Macgregor isn't just talking about politics, he's warning that the foundation itself is cracking, and when the foundation breaks, the whole house follows.